How to Read and Understand the Biblical Prophets by Peter J. Gentry, Chapter 6, Describing the Future, Part 2, Apocalyptic Language. One way to describe the future is to employ models or patterns from the past. Another way to describe events that may be part of a reality different from that of the hearers or readers is to use metaphors and symbolic language. That is the topic of this chapter. What are the features of Hebrew literature or the literature of the prophets that help us understand their communicative method? What future is being described? Imagine a prophetic voice today addressing the historical, political, and religious context in North America. He might make predictions about what will happen in 6 months or a year. He might predict events to happen in 20 years. Or he might, rarely, announce a matter to happen in the distant future. Let us consider how these three options might be communicated to today's public. First, in announcing events to happen next month or in 6 months, the cities, provinces, states, countries, and country leaders in his prophecy would likely be the same as today. He could describe in plain speech, without metaphors or symbolic language, the events about to happen. He could name an individual or a city or a place known to all and describe in precise terms the details of the events. Second, if he were to describe events that were to happen in 20 or 200 years, he could theoretically take the same approach, but his hearers would not be able to grasp the implications in quite the same way. As I look back over the space of time since my childhood school days, so many things have changed. No leaders alive then are alive now. The map of the world has changed. Some countries no longer exist. New countries have sprung up in place of them. Some countries have different names. Borders have shifted. Cultures and languages and peoples have changed. Some animals and birds and insects are now extinct. How is one to describe a significant future event? If we remember that one of the key themes in the Bible is the relationship between God and his creatures, particularly humans, a prophet would use metaphors, symbolic language, and typology to speak of future events in order to keep the focus on relationships in view. Nonetheless, the biblical story is firmly rooted in space and time, and the future involves specific people and places. Third, let us consider how a prophet would announce something to happen 2,000 to 6,000 years into the future. The plan and program to renew and restore a broken world require time. Real solutions are rarely instant. Consider, for example, the prophecy in Genesis 3:15, which was fulfilled 2,000 years later. How would a prophet communicate effectively about this future scenario? By way of illustrating the answer, imagine a person from the Western world traveling deep into the jungles of Papua New Guinea in the year 2000. He has linguistic training and is able to decipher the language from the native speaker, and he becomes friends with the native people. One day, a person from the tribe sees the linguist typing on his Apple Macintosh computer. "What are you doing?" she asks. "And how does this thing work?" Well, there would be no point in giving her a literal description of electricity and bits and bytes and binary math. The only way to communicate would be through metaphors and symbols, and the communication could be extremely effective just at that level alone. Literal details about computing would be unnecessary. Illustration from Isaiah 13 through 27. Let us look at the messages in Isaiah 13 through 27 concerning the foreign nations to see that they operate on exactly these three levels. Chart 6.1. Overview of Isaiah 13 through 27. A. Babylon 13:1 through 14:27. Philistia 14:28 through 32. Moab 15:1 through 16:14. Damascus, Ephraim 17:1 through 18:7, Egypt 19:1 through 26. B. The Desert by the Sea 21:1 through 10, Silence, Duma 21:11 through 12, Evening, Arabia 21:13 through 17, The Valley of Vision 22:1 through 25, Tyre 23:1 through 18. C. The City of Wasteland 24:21 through 23, Zion's King 24:21 through 23, The Great Banquet 25:1 through 12, The City of God 26:1 through 20, The Final Gathering 27:1 through 13. 15 prophetic messages concerning the foreign nations are arranged in 3 groups of 5. Note that the 4th message in each group of 5 deals specifically with the people of God in some way. The arrangement is not haphazard. While most of these messages are written in poetry, the first 10 have prose headings or titles. These titles generally orient the reader to the geographical or ethnic group that is addressed by the prophet. The geographical locations for the first 5 messages are simple and straightforward. Every person in Israel knows these countries. Babylon is in the far east, Philistia is in the near west, Moab in the near east, Ephraim and Damascus are to the north, and Egypt is in the far west and south. These messages cover the countries around Israel systematically. The second set of 5 messages begins in Isaiah 21. While these messages also have prose headings, the titles are mysterious. For example, in 21:1 we have The Oracle Concerning the Wilderness of the Sea. Where on earth is that? The reader knows all the places mentioned in the first set of 5 oracles, but this particular place wasn't part of the 12th grade Israel geography. So the reader must continue reading. Only toward the end, 21:9, does he discover that the author is describing Babylon. After divine judgment brings complete destruction, Babylon will be a desolate spot on the Persian Gulf. Indeed, a desert by the sea, inhabited by various types of owls. See 13:21 through 22. In Isaiah 21:11 through 12, we have an oracle concerning Duma, another location beyond 12th grade geography in Israel. Could the author be referring to Duma, Dedan, and Tema, oases in the North Arabian trade routes? According to Isaiah 39, King Hezekiah of Judah was expecting help from the Babylonians against the Assyrians. One secret way to get from Babylon to Judah was to cross the desert using these oases. In Isaiah 21:11b, Seir is mentioned, which seems to refer to Edom. A watchman is waiting for a message during the night. Would help come to Judah via Edom during the night? The word Duma can mean silence. Perhaps it is a play on words concerning Edom. The devastation in the country from which help is expected is so great that there is nothing but silence. No help is coming after all. In 21:13 through 15, there is an oracle concerning Arabia. Does the word refer to Arabia, or is it a noun meaning desert, or perhaps a play on the word for evening? There is uncertainty in translating this word. It appears to deal with fugitives and refugees coming from these oases in the North Arabian desert. Apparently, Babylon has fallen and no help is coming from there at all. The sun has set on Babylon, so evening comes without help. Then in Isaiah 22, we have an oracle concerning the Valley of Vision. We have never heard of this place either. As we continue to read, we discover that Isaiah is speaking of the city of Jerusalem and the plans Yahweh has for it. Only the last message in Isaiah 23 mentions a place well known, Tyre. Whether the interpretations I suggest are all correct is immaterial. The main point is that in the second set of 5 messages, Isaiah is playing games with words. The messages are more like parables. Only those in the remnant with ears to hear and eyes to see and hearts to understand will be able to grasp the comfort from these messages. See Isaiah 6, 9, and 10. Some of the events may be further away in time than the events foretold in the first 5. When the reader comes to the third set of 5 messages, there are no prose headings. No geographical places are mentioned. The language seems to speak about the whole world in a general way. Here, Isaiah seems to be dealing with a distant future. His language is full of metaphors and symbols, so much so that scholars have labeled chapters 24 through 27 Isaiah's little apocalypse. It is time then to ask, what does the word apocalypse, or the adjective apocalyptic, really mean? The answer may be quite different from what we are given in the movies from Hollywood. Apocalyptic definition. No doubt you have discovered from reading books such as Daniel or Zechariah that these do not fit the normal pattern for prophets. True, Zechariah begins in an ordinary sort of way with a call to repentance, and Daniel commences with stories of courageous Jews who excelled in faithfulness during years of exile and oppression by foreign overlords. Then we enter a strange world of visions. Daniel has visions containing weird beasts coming up out of the sea, and Zechariah sees a gigantic flying scroll, 10 feet by 30 feet. No doubt the divine word in a special edition for the spiritually blind. If we are going to make any headway in this strange world, the first thing we must do is come to grips with the genre or kind of literature we are reading. What sort of literature is this? How do the authors of this stuff communicate, assuming they intend to make some sense at all? At least part of these books appears in a genre called apocalyptic. So I will begin with a description of apocalyptic and the approach necessary to properly understand this literary world. While it is difficult to define apocalyptic, a consensus has emerged that the word refers to a kind of literature, not to a community or an approach to theology. The word apocalyptic comes from the Greek title of the book of Revelation in the New Testament. Moreover, the first verses of Revelation directly alludes to Daniel 2, verses 28 through 30 and 45, where we discover that God is the one who reveals secrets. Apocalyptic has to do with revealing secrets, usually about the future. Apocalyptic literature in the Bible and in the period of Second Temple Judaism, from 250 BC to AD 250, has a number of common characteristics and features. These can be described both briefly and simply as follows. Narrative framework. Apocalyptic normally has a narrative framework. This means that the contents, no matter how weird, are given in the form and framework of a story. Schematization of history. Frequently, the narrative provides a schematization of history. In other words, the course of human history is arranged into periods. Given by heavenly messenger. The revelation is mediated by an angel or heavenly messenger to a human recipient, usually a prophet or seer. We see this in Daniel, Zechariah, and Revelation. In Revelation, John wants to bow down and worship the heavenly messenger, but is strictly warned not to do so. God's eye view of history. Since apocalyptic involves God revealing secrets, it provides a God's eye view of human history. We will see this in particular when we compare Daniel 2 and 7. In fact, all of the prophecy presents issues from God's point of view. The book of Amos opens with the words, "The Lord roars from Zion and utters his voice from Jerusalem. The pastures of the shepherds mourn, and the top of Carmel withers." Amos 1:2 ESV. During the time of Amos, the people experienced great prosperity and success. It was the best of times. Yahweh didn't think so. He thought it was the worst of times. The word roars implies a comparison between the Lord and a lion. The lion's home is Zion, or Jerusalem. His roar is so powerful that the grass on Mount Carmel, 60 miles away, withers. Things may be going well from the people's point of view, but God has a different perspective. The land is filled with idolatry and social injustice. Colorful metaphors and symbols. With this focus on the divine perspective and viewpoint, the way God sees things, it is not surprising that colorful imagery and metaphors are used. By way of illustration, imagine explaining to a person from a Stone Age culture what a computer is and how electricity works. Apocalyptic includes many different kinds of symbolism. Almost all numbers in apocalyptic are symbolic. Future hope in present trouble. The revelation almost always has to do with future deliverance and salvation. It is given in crisis, in difficult times, normally when the people of God are called to endure a period of suffering. The apocalypse announces future rescue of the people of God and seeks to interpret present circumstances from God's point of view and to comfort and encourage his people to appropriate behavior as they await final rescue. This definition applies to many Jewish writings written mainly from 250 BC to AD 250 and includes 1 Enoch, 4 Ezra, 2 Baruch, Apocalypse of Abraham, 3 Baruch, 2 Enoch, Testament of Levi 2 through 5, the fragmentary Apocalypse of Zephaniah, not the biblical book, and in part also to Jubilees and the Testament of Abraham, which are heavily influenced by the biblical books of Daniel and Zechariah. Apocalyptic is easier to describe than to define. Let me describe the hope of Israel and show the way in which this hope was expressed. Israel's hope during the Second Temple period. What kind of hope did Jewish people have after the exile when they had returned and rebuilt the temple? The basis of the faith of Israel was that there is one Creator God and that Israel is his covenant people. Although Israel had returned to the land after the exile, she was still suffering under the oppression of foreign overlords. In a very real sense, she was still in a state of exile, and this had to be put right. Sooner or later, this Creator God in covenant with Israel must step in and honor his covenant promises. The symbols of the covenant will be restored because the covenant will be renewed. The temple will be rebuilt, the land will be cleansed, and the Torah will be kept perfectly by a new covenant people with renewed hearts. Jewish writers adapted a literary form and a specific type of language for expressing this hope, namely apocalyptic. A literary form and a way of speaking. Apocalyptic is both a genre or kind of literature and a type of language that may be used in other genres that are not apocalyptic. Apocalyptic language uses complex and highly colored metaphors and symbols in order to describe one event in terms of another. In this way, an event can be described and, at the same time, the meaning of the event can be explained. We use this kind of language all the time ourselves. Suppose a news reporter had described the fall of the Berlin Wall as one well might as an earth-shattering event. Such a description might perhaps lead some future historian, writing in the Martian Journal of Early European Studies, to hypothesize that an earthquake had caused the collapse of the wall, leading to both sides realizing they could live together after all. A good many readings of Daniel or Revelation in our century operate on about that level of understanding. Or consider another example, this time 5 people who are describing the same event. One says, "I was aware of a blur of color and a sudden loud noise." The next says, "I saw and heard a vehicle driving noisily down the road." The next says, "I saw an ambulance on its way to the hospital." The fourth says, "I have just witnessed a tragedy." The fifth says, "This is the end of the world for me." The same event gives rise to 5 true statements, with each successive one having more meaning than the one before. A biblical example of a similar phenomenon occurs in 2 Samuel 18:29 through 33. David is waiting for news of his troops in the battle against his rebel son Absalom. The first messenger says, "I saw a great commotion, but I do not know what it was." The second says, "May the enemies of the Lord the King and all who rise up against you for evil be like that young man." Both have described the same event. The second has invested it with its meaning. Not only, however, has he said what David needed to hear, that Absalom is dead, he has also invested that news with the further comment that he himself is a loyal subject of the king. Perhaps he knew the king's inclination for anger against those who brought good but upsetting news, 2 Samuel 2:11-16, and chose to give his message obliquely, couching it as an expression of loyalty. David in turn makes his own statement about the same event. "Oh, my son Absalom, my son, Absalom, would I have died instead of you? Oh, Absalom, my son, my son." Each of the speakers is referring to the same event. The different modes of speech invest the reality referred to with increasing layers of meaning.